This is episode 19 of the Gambling Still Sucks podcast. In this episode, I'll talk about dealing with the fun that you had while you were gambling and those urges to return. Hey there, and welcome to the Gambling Still Sucks podcast. My name is Jamie. I am a compulsive gambler, and I'm also the host of this show. The last time I gambled was July 15th of 2010. While there are many different questions that pop up from compulsive gamblers as they start to enter recovery or have been in recovery for a while, or even just people that aren't ready to quit yet, there's one that seems to be very consistent, and I can appreciate this because it's something I definitely struggled with personally. And that's really kind of boils down to hey, I had a really good time playing whatever game it was. And for me, as you know, it was poker. And so I had so much time, and it's kind of a multi-part thing. What do I do because I don't really want to give it up? And also, if and when I do give it up, how do I replace it? How do I deal with kind of getting that same excitement in my life after I quit gambling? And as I said, this was a huge struggle for me personally. My game of choice was poker, and it was something I spent hours and hours and developed a lot of skill in and a huge love for the game. I mean, I was an athlete, and poker was right up there with golf and basketball and these other sports that I played, and really spent a lot of time developing my skills and just playing it and enjoying it. And I enjoyed being with the other people, and I enjoyed kind of that thrill of victory. And probably in a lot of ways, I enjoyed the agony of defeat. There's a part of me that doesn't like success because I think I'm always striving to do more and to get better. And so failure is that opportunity. While you don't like it, it's the opportunity to look at it and try and come up with a new and better way to do it going forward. And that was definitely my approach when I was playing poker. And so it was a long time before I sort of came to grips with the fact that, hey, this is something I'm going to choose not to do for the rest of my life. And this wasn't something that happened on day one when I got caught and ran off the riverboat. At that point, it was probably the strongest, and I said, yeah, I don't want to ever do this again. But as I got further away from that, I mean, that desire to, man, I'd like to play a little bit, at least socially or with friends, those thoughts started to creep in more and more. And it was something that I was probably 6-8 months into GA recovery, and I was still struggling with, okay, at some point, am I going to have to give this up for the rest of my life? And now I'm comfortable in saying, yeah, that is something I'm going to give up for the rest of my life. And I'll get into the details of that later. But I just want to say to you, if you're struggling with this early on, it's completely normal. And I think it is. Anything that we do, whether it's a long-term friend that we spend a lot of time with, and maybe unfortunately they pass away or they move away or something happens to break up that friendship, there's a mourning period, there's a loss, and there's an emptiness that you can't just go out and replace. And so that's another part we'll talk about later in the podcast, is coming up with new ways or new things to kind of replace that time and energy. But I just want to say up front, if you're feeling this way, it's completely normal. I think we all feel that way. And so don't let those feelings kind of pull you back. I would encourage you to push through and to really just kind of examine those feelings and maybe just push them off to the side for months. And that was kind of my approach, was look, I'm not really ready to say that I'm never going to play poker again, but I'm ready to say I'm not going to play today. And I'll revisit this in 6 months, in a year, or in 3 years. And in giving myself that time, I was able to kind of have a lot more clear thinking and to kind of see the full picture. So I guess the first thing I want to talk about is just that joy of the game. And I think no matter what game it is, and one thing I've noticed, especially in GA meetings, because you see the reaction on people's face when they talk about whatever game it was, whether it was a certain casino game or a certain slot machine, or a certain card game, or a certain lottery ticket, or the pick three, or whatever the gambling might be, their demeanor completely changes when they start to talk about it. And there's definitely a reminiscing, and you can tell it's like talking about a good friend that you no longer are associated with, but you have all these really kind of positive thoughts and feelings for. And that's definitely one of the hardest things about addiction in general, and especially this one, is that it's hard to separate those good positive experiences from the negative. And for whatever reason, over time, our brains and our mindset tends to over kind of exaggerate the good times and really minimizes the bad times. And that's kind of what keeps us in the cycle and returning to do it more. But there's definitely a feeling of positivity, of an enjoyment, like I say, of an old friend or something like that. And it was a time that whatever your game of choice, there was a good feeling for it. Or actually, now that I have some kind of distance, there were a lot of bad feelings that it allowed me to avoid. And so even just that ability to avoid those bad feelings is a huge positive. It's something that makes whatever game that you played or I played really kind of, like I say, an old friend or something that we have fond memories of. Despite the fact that it tore every area of our life apart, we still have these fond memories. And so that's something that's interesting to kind of think about. And I think it's important to kind of look at those positive times, but also give equal weight to the negative aspects. But yes, no matter where you are in your recovery, whether you are at day one or hoping to get to day one, or if you're at 7 years like I am, it still is tough to look back and to separate some of those fond memories from the negative ones. And like I say, as you go on and you get some more time, it becomes easier and easier. And I especially see that with some of the older guys that I've met that have 20 and 30 years. At that point, it's not even really a challenge, I don't think. It's something they keep very mindful of, but it's not nearly as difficult as it is in those early days of deciding that you're not going to go back and revisit those positive feelings. Now, as I sort of mentioned earlier, the positive feelings always in our heads outweigh the negative ones. But I think telling ourselves that full story is one of the huge things to help kind of balance those things out, to realize that for every positive experience that we had, there were quite a few negatives. And I want to take it even a step further. And one thing that really helped me is to look at it and say, okay, poker is something I really, really enjoyed, but it's just one thing. It's only one thing. And if I continue to go down the path and pursue this one thing, this one area of my life of enjoyment, the reality is that I don't have the option to enjoy anything else. Pretty much across the board, every other area of enjoyment of my life, my personal life, my friends, my work, they all go down the toilet. They all get flushed away if I choose to play poker. And I think that's one of those dangers with it, is that we aren't able to just kind of balance it and to do just a little bit and just kind of balance all those things at once. Our compulsive nature tends to go 100% into it. And so in doing so, we eliminate everything else. And for me, that has been extremely freeing, just to kind of say, hey, you know what? This is one thing. It's one thing I love to do. I would love to go back and do it again if I could know that I wasn't going to create all these problems. But I'm pretty sure that I will create those problems again. And I'm just more comfortable giving up one thing to have everything else. And so I hope that thought really helps you, and really think about it, because it is true. I mean, I look at my current life, and I mean, I'm developing friendships back again, and my family life. I mean, I wouldn't have my 2 kids if I chose to continue to gamble. And even if I went back to it, I wouldn't have them in my life. I mean, they would be out of my life as I know it today. And so my family would be gone. My friends would be gone because I would choose to play poker over my friends. I did it for 7 years, and I would go right back to doing it once again. And my work was miserable. It was terrible. I created huge holes for myself trying to balance work and poker when poker was the number one and work got pushed way to the back. And now obviously I have time to devote to work, and work is going really well, but that's another thing. So the positive financial aspects of that will go away if I choose that one thing. And so no matter what your one thing is or was, I want you to really kind of keep that in mind, that if you go back to that, you're choosing that one thing over everything else. Because if you look at all the other areas of your life that kind of deteriorated as you were gambling more and more, that's reality. It's not some big claim I'm making that you're choosing one thing over everything else. You've already lived it. You know it's true. So just keep that in mind anytime as you start your recovery and you start to think, okay, I'd really like to do that. I wish I could do that again because I have all these positive experiences. Remember that that one positive experience is going to wipe out all the other positive experiences in your life. So accept the fact that it was a good time and it was like an old friend, but an old friend that then turned on you and you don't want to go back and do that again. And remember that that one thing is not worth giving up everything else for. And next, I just want to transition into the next big question, which is how do I fill my time? Because we spent an awful lot of time when we were gambling doing our thing, right? And it was whether it was driving to the casino or researching the bets to place. We spent hours and hours of our life devoted to gambling. And so it creates a huge void when we stop. And it's this big time. And I think that freedom, that extra time is the big thing, especially early on, is how do you fill that? And for me, one of the things was going to a GA meeting. And that's a couple hours a week. It was a small amount to fill, but that was one of them. I also did a lot of personal kind of self-reflection. I did personal therapy, which took up some time. And I read a ton of books, a ton of books, probably more books than I should have read. But that was another thing that I just kind of said, okay, hey, let me start to dig in. And I really kind of probably became compulsive about self-improvement. And so that was one area that really helped me. Now I know other people dive into other things, and some people really dive into video games, and that could be a good thing. Another one is working out. I know Rob shared that working out has been a big thing for him, and it's something he does daily. And that's been a huge piece of his recovery, is filling that void and working out, which also kind of decreases depression and has all sorts of other positive aspects to it. So maybe working out is one of those things that you incorporate as you move into recovery. And I mentioned earlier that I've spent a lot more time on my work, and that's another place. We think of gambling as a financial problem when we're gambling, and it's only in recovery that we realize it's not about the finances at all. But the easiest way to fix financial issues is to improve our work, improve our value. And so taking more classes or watching some YouTube videos to enhance your craft and to become better at whatever you do is going to reward you with increased revenue, increased income, or the ability to change jobs if you hate your job. And so that's another way to start to fill the time that you use gambling, but put it to a positive way. And those are just a few of the things. I mean, any type of hobby you can imagine, any type of sport or activity or group activity. And I would encourage that. Focus on things that you can do as a group or collectively. Maybe it's joining some kind of sporting league or some kind of club, a book club. Because I think one of the things that we really get going down the wrong path with gambling is it's such an isolated event. And so I think getting back into something where we're with other people is a positive thing. And I also think it protects us from the next thing which I want to mention, which is no matter what you choose, whether it's video games or sports or working out, just be very mindful that our compulsive behaviors will pop up pretty much in all areas. And so be careful when you're working out. Be careful when you're playing video games. Make sure that you set limits. And I know this sort of sounds like the gambling ads at this point, but just now you know that you're like this, that you are compulsive. You have a tendency to be compulsive. So really just kind of be mindful and kind of check in with yourself. Or as I said earlier, do these things with friends so that they can kind of help you balance and create balance within whatever activity it is. Because no matter what it is, work, family, friends, you can overdo all of these things. And I know I've overdone pretty much all of them at certain times. And it's hard to keep balance, but it's something to just be mindful of and keep trying to make sure, okay, hey, I've been going too hard on this. I want to continue, and I see this especially with work. I want to do this project this weekend and just get it done. But I just tell myself, no, it's the weekend. This is the time that you don't need to be working on work. And so it's one of those things to self-regulate, and it comes with time, but really be mindful early on so you don't just skip from one addiction to another. And so that pretty much wraps up this episode. Like I said, accept the fact that it is something you enjoyed, but realize that that enjoyment is not worth giving up all the other enjoyment that you have ahead of you in life. Because I know a lot of people listen to this are in their 20s or 30s, and even if you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you have a lot of life ahead. And no matter how many days, whether it's 100 days, 1,000 days or 10,000 days ahead of you. I haven't done the math. 10,000 days. Yeah, is that doable? Yeah, that's definitely doable. Sorry. Just wanted to make sure that I wasn't throwing out some random number there. But no matter how many days you have ahead of you, make the most of them. And we all know at this point that gambling and that one thing, that one thrill and rush isn't worth giving up everything else. And the more that you get away from it and the more that you start to get back into these everyday life things that are enjoyable and you can see kind of the benefits of not gambling, the easier it's going to be for you to quit. So hang in there, start to find some new hobbies, but do them in moderation, self-regulate, and stay focused on your recovery. And with that, I will see you in the next episode. Thanks again for listening. It's great to hear all your feedback, and I look forward to seeing you in episode 20. It's hard to believe, episode 20. And on that note, before we wrap this up, I want to say I haven't checked the numbers. It's probably 4,000 downloads now, which is just incredible. And so I'll check that. I'll post a note in the show notes on current download numbers, but it is insane, these numbers. So keep listening. I appreciate it. And I'm glad to know that this is helping some people out there in the world. Thanks again. I'm Jamie, and I will see you next episode. Now, before you go, I'd like to go over a few very important things. First of all, I think it's important to remember that problem gambling is a treatable disorder. There's no scientific evidence or study that suggests that this is just a terminal condition and that we're going to be forced to deal with the negative side effects and results of our actions for the rest of our lives. And so while I know that in the moment it feels like this is something that you're going to be struggling with for the rest of your life, science just doesn't back that up. Recovery is real, but we just need to seek out treatment. And so that brings me to point number 2, which is that help is available. Many of the states here in the United States actually offer free counseling and therapy for not only gamblers, but family members as well. And so you just need to know that these programs are available. And the best way to start finding out more information is to call the hotline number. And that's 1-800-522-4700. Again, that's 1-800-522-4700. And this is the number run by the National Council on Problem Gambling. And so it covers all 50 states. And they're going to have information and be able to start to guide you on the path to seek out help in the area where you live. And these hotlines aren't just available here in the United States. They're available around the world. So just simply open up a web browser, type in gambling help, gambling hotline, and you'll be able to find the information for your local area. In addition to the hotlines, there are numerous places where you can find gambling support and information online. If you go to gamblingstillsucks.com/help, I'll list some of these things and I'll continue to add to this as I find new resources, whether they're chat groups or online forums or just great information. So again, that was gamblingstillsucks.com/help. As a disclaimer, this podcast does not provide legal or medical advice. Look, I'm not a doctor, a therapist, or an attorney. I'm just a guy who had a gambling problem. So while we'll discuss a lot of topics and I'll provide a lot of insight into what's worked for me, please seek out the help of a professional. Go visit a lawyer, a doctor, or a therapist to help you deal with your gambling problem. The information that we discuss is for informational purposes and should not be taken as professional legal or medical advice. And reliance on the information appearing on the podcast is solely at your own risk. The music for this podcast is Something Elated by Broke for Free and licensed under the Creative Commons.